US President Joe Biden says all-out war in the Middle East has to be avoided. He made the comments soon after Washington increased military air support in the region.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided?
It has to be. We really have to avoid it. And we've already taken precautions relative to our embassies and personnel who want to leave. But we're not there yet, but we're working like hell with the French and many others to see that we'll avoid. Thank you.
Well, let's get more on this now with Al Jazeera's Phil Lavelle. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Phil, so what more did President Biden have to say on the crisis?
To be frank, Darren, not a huge amount more, and that's probably partly by design. I mean, bear in mind that this was not a big official press conference. This was the president. He was getting on a plane to come back to Washington from his beach house in Delaware. So it was one of those situations where he gets a few questions thrown by journalists, but also because there's not much he can say, really, because what it does is this kind of shows the, not just gap, but the chasm that is opening up between him and Prime Minister Netanyahu, because he said that he would speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He didn't say when, maybe he doesn't even know, and he didn't say what they would say on this call. But of course, we've seen over the last few days, just even as recently as last week, when they were talking about this potential 21-day ceasefire, at the same time almost that Prime Minister Netanyahu was authorizing these strikes in Beirut. So it's showing really this division between the two men. In terms of official lines, we've heard more from the likes of John Kirby, the National Security Communications Advisor. He said on breakfast television here in the US on Sunday that the death of Nasrallah was good for the world. Other official lines, really, we've heard that Secretary Blinken has had a conversation with his French counterpart, again, pushing the need for a ceasefire. And we know that the US military assets in the region have been put on a heightened readiness alert to deploy. But other than that, the White House, perhaps deliberately, not saying too much on this at the moment.
Yeah, and Biden's Vice President, Kamala Harris, has also been speaking about the issue. Phil, what did she have to say then?
Yeah, so this is quite interesting because they both made a statement. They both released written statements on Saturday. President Biden's was fairly long. It's talked about, first of all, the reasons that they believe justice had been served with the death of Hassan Nasrallah, then going on to talk about Israel's right to exist and talking about a ceasefire. Kamala Harris's statement was much more pointed. One correspondent I heard use the word giddy. I don't know if maybe if that is as strong as it was, but it was certainly more celebratory of the fact that Nasrallah had been killed. Now, this is quite interesting because previously, when we've heard from Kamala Harris, she's talked about the need for a ceasefire as well. That wasn't mentioned here. She was talking a few hours ago at a rally in Nevada. I watched the entire thing. She didn't mention it at all, not a single word about people in Gaza, people in Lebanon, the need for a ceasefire. So that was quite an interesting change. But what is also interesting is that Donald Trump hasn't mentioned this. Remember, we are now just weeks away. It's 30-something days until this country goes to the polls for this election. Donald Trump has said that we are hurtling towards world war. Only he can stop it. Kamala Harris has tried to present herself as a bit more measured and said that there needs to be more diplomacy involved. Neither of them have talked about this, but one person I'll tell you who has weighed in on the subject, interestingly, Jared Kushner. Now, you may remember him. He is Donald Trump's son-in-law, but not only is he a relative, he was a senior advisor in the Trump administration. Remember, this is the man who described the Gaza Strip as prime real estate. He has come out and he has said that this will be Israel's one chance to, quote, finish the job, get rid of Hezbollah. Obviously, a lot of people who are worried that Donald Trump may ascend back into the White House come November or come January, watching those words very closely because it shows just the kind of influence that people may have over him.
All right, Phil Lavelle, live for us there in Washington, D.C. Phil, thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.